If you've been perusing music production tutorials, you've probably heard people throwing around the phrase sound selection a lot. But if you're just starting out, you might be wondering, what is sound selection and how do I do it? And the answer is actually pretty simple. So in today's video, I'm going to be breaking down exactly what sound selection is and showing you side-by-side examples of how proper sound selection can completely transform your music. So last night I was in the mood to make vintage soul samples, and it sort of got me thinking about how when I first started out, I really had no idea what sound selection was, and I didn't know what I was doing wrong to not be able to capture these sounds I was going for. And I realized maybe I could give some tips to you guys and just show you what I've learned over the years of doing this to sort of capture the vibe I'm going for right away without having to sit and struggle over finding what exactly is wrong and stopping me from getting the sound I'm looking for. Let's start by defining sound design. Essentially, there's two large umbrellas that sound design can fit under, and it's really talking about the quality of your sounds and the style of your sounds. Quality is pretty straightforward. Essentially, you can get the stock kick drum from FL Studio, whatever's loaded in the channel rack when you open up a new project, and you can definitely make really good music with those sounds, but odds are it's not going to be the best it could possibly be if you went out and you found some professionally designed sounds or learned to design better sounds yourself. If you can go and get great drums, there's free ones out there on Reddit, r/drum kits. Definitely recommend that for people starting out on a budget. Or you can download packs from your favorite producers or artists. A lot of times they'll just release custom packs of sounds that they make themselves. So having really good high quality sounds is a good way to instantly level up your production. You're not having to fight with bad EQs or harsh frequencies that aren't in high quality sounds that will probably just sit a little bit better in your mix. But the other side of the coin, which I think is a lot more relevant for someone that maybe has the theory or the ear down, but still isn't quite capturing the vibe they're looking for, and that's in the type of sounds that they're using. So like I said, last night I was in the mood to make these vintage soul samples, and when you're trying to make anything vintage, you want to think about the time period you're trying to emulate, right? So if we're talking about the 70s, a little bit of synthesis was happening around then. There were some really cool, rudimentary synths happening, but a lot of the mainstream music, a lot of the mainstream soul was all organic instruments. So we're talking strings, horns, pianos, organs, real people playing real instruments. You know, you had choirs in the studio, you had these big bands, rather than just a person sitting at a computer pulling electronic sounds in. So if I'm trying to capture this soul vibe, I need to go for organic sounds, right? So just to demonstrate, here's the loop that I came up with last night. It's got a piano, it's got an organ. Organs were huge in vintage soul. It's got strings, BBC orchestra. It's got this vibraphone, a bell that's sort of playing a glockenspiel roll, which was also pretty popular back in that time. And then all of my percussive elements feel and sound like a real drum kit, or at least a little bit more like a real drum kit. And then I've got this trumpet melody coming in the second half that I think really ties it all together and gives it this triumphant, soulful vibe. So altogether, this is what the loop I came up with last night sounded like when I was targeting that soul vibe. So you can hear, you could almost imagine a group of people actually playing all of these instruments, and they all mesh together, they all fit, and they don't feel too overly synthetic, or at least that was the goal. I wasn't using 808 or 909 drum kits. I wasn't using a bass that sounds extremely heavy with crazy distortion and slides. It sounds like something someone could play on a bass guitar, There's sounds that I selected that fit the vibe I was going for. And so what I did here is everything in purple is my original loop. And so I copied all the elements over and I changed some of the sounds. So if the color changed in the next section, it's actually a new sound. but all of the MIDI elements have stayed completely the same. And you'll hear that when I switch the keys for even just an electric piano, which was around in 70s soul, change it for more of like a live bass VST, a little bit more of an ethereal synth, and a much more synthetic lead, and then change the drums to something a little bit more clicky, a little bit more like, I guess, yeah, they're trap drums. These are from Ed Talenti's drum kit. Shout out Ed Talenti. So if I take this soul melody and put it in more of like an electronic space with trap drums, you can hear that it sort of completely transforms the energy of the loop. Before I get into how changing the sounds can completely transform the loop, if you're finding this video helpful, please think about hitting the subscribe button. I'm going to be posting a new video every single week where I share my tips and tricks to help you get better at making music. So if you want to see more, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and let me know in the comments what you want to see next. Now, back to the video. Let's give that a listen. So you can hear that it feels completely different than the original soul loop, but that doesn't mean it's wrong, right? I think that's a really important thing to remember, is that music is an art, right? And that's in the eye of the beholder. It's subjective and there are really no rules. Sound selection is just sort of a framework to sort of help guide your selections in choosing from this infinite array of sounds that exist in the world. But that doesn't mean that this second loop is bad or a problem or sounds terrible. It's got a different vibe and a different energy, but it's the exact same notes being played. So if I was going for vintage soul, these sounds probably don't quite get me there, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily bad. That being said, if I did really want to lean into these trap drum sounds and a little bit more of the modern and electronic feel, we could do some things with the arrangement to make them fit even farther into that vibe. So rather than taking exactly the same MIDI and putting them into new noises, I pulled some of the same elements from the second loop into the third loop. I switched out my live bass for a harder hitting 808. I changed the electronic lead to a flute, and then I added a little bit more energy in the hi-hats, now hitting on every 16th note with a couple of rolls. And then just to keep it from getting a little bit too busy, I pulled out a couple of those offbeat hi-hats. So if I were leaning into that trap feel, again with essentially the same melody, it might sound a little bit like this. So again, as you can see, just by changing a few sounds and a little bit of the bounce and a tiny bit of the arrangement on basically just the drums, we again completely transform this melody into a whole new, basically genre, right? These are three completely different vibes with the same core elements, just different sounds. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it for sound selection. I mean, it really is as simple as it seems. You just need to think about where you're trying to get before you try to get there, and then pick the sounds that you think will help you along the way. It's good to think of it as a framework and less as a set of rules, because rules are meant to be broken anyway, right? If you've got something that feels a little bit disjointed, if you've got this fully organic track in one heavily synthetic element, you can end up creating really cool contrast and evoke some interesting feelings. So I encourage you to play around with it, but I would try to focus on the highest quality sounds that you can get your hands on. I think that's all I've got for you guys. I hope this video is helpful for some of you. If it was, please think about hitting the subscribe button. I'm on the road to my first 100 subscribers. I'll be posting new videos every single week with tips and tricks on how to get better at music production, how to make certain genres, and maybe occasionally come out with some type of challenge video. So if there's something that you want me to teach you, let me know in the comments. If you have any questions, I will be answering every single one down below. And yeah, I think that's all I got for you now. So see you guys back here next week. Peace.